Good evening, everyone. We are going to get started in just a minute or two here. We want to make sure we give everyone time. So welcome to our Nurtured Heart Approach Parent University. We'll just give everyone about a minute or 90 seconds to get settled and get all of our attendees in from the waiting room. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our Parent University. We're just giving everyone about a minute more to get settled and get in from the waiting room. We'll get started in just a few seconds. All right. Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Jessica Smedley, and I am the Director of Counseling here in West Windsor-Plainsboro Regional School District. And we have another exciting Parent University for you tonight about introducing you to the Nurtured Heart Approach and two of our district employees, Ms. Pema Nadong and Mr. Jonathan Walton. And I'm going to let them do a little bit more intros of themselves, but I just want to talk a little bit about some housekeeping items before we jump into our topic, which is telling you a little bit more about the Nurtured Heart Approach, something that we're excited to bring into WWP this year. And so the Nurtured Heart Approach is sponsored by a grant that our district received called the Developing Resiliency with Engaging Approaches to Maximize Success program. So we call it DREAMS for short. It is a joint venture between the Division of Children and Families in New Jersey and the New Jersey Department of Education. And so it's actually a twofold grant that our district was lucky enough to get, which included funding for training Pema and John in the Nurtured Heart Approach to bring it to our school district as an approach for both our parents and families caretakers, but also primarily to come in and train our staff and figure out how to incorporate the Nurtured Heart Approach into our culture and climate within each of our school buildings. So they are going to tell you a lot more about that. So just a couple housekeeping items. We are recording tonight's webinar. So you can certainly take notes if you'd like, but within the next few days, certainly by the beginning of next week, we will have this with the transcription up on our district YouTube site. So you can find it there if you missed anything. And I just want to give a coming attraction for the end of the program. Tonight is really just a quick introduction, a 1-hour introduction, sort of giving you an overview of the Nurtured Heart Approach. So it's not the full training, but it is something that we are looking to kind of gauge interest from our families and caretakers about bringing in and sort of doing parent caretaker training, coaching, that kind of thing. So we're going to have an interest survey at the end of tonight's program. It'll have a QR code, so you can scan that at the end with your phone or other device. And we always look forward to hearing from you. So if you have questions about tonight's program, you can follow up with any of us. We all have our district first name dot last name at wwprsd.org emails. Just one other item is that we have the chat feature for tonight turned off, but we do have the Q&A turned on. So it's going to be a lot of action-packed, information-packed next 55 to 57 minutes. So I invite you to just kind of listen and participate. But if you do have a question, we probably will not have time for a full Q&A session, but we are recording the Q&A and can certainly follow up if you have a specific question that we're not able to get to tonight and would like some follow-up. Please feel free to leave your contact information in that Q&A. The Q&A is not public, so you won't see, no one else will see if you've asked us a question, but all three of us will be able to take that and respond to those questions afterwards. So without further ado, I'm going to pass the presentation over to Pema.
Hello, everyone. So my name is Pema Narang, and I am the DEI coordinator for the district, as well as previously being an elementary classroom teacher and a multilingual teacher at Dutch Neck Elementary School. So our main goal with the Nurtured Heart approach, the PD offerings, is to offer an asset-based approach to fostering positive relationships with our children for both our staff members as well as our children's parents or guardians. So while initially targeted to intense or high energy students, research has shown that implementation of this approach with all children has positive outcomes. This approach was created by Howard Glasser. And as a licensed professional counselor, Howard found that the training he received did not work with challenging children. And as he reflected on his own experience as a difficult child, he realized that the energetic interactions below the surface were really controlling situations. And from that realization, he created the Nurtured Heart approach and went on to found the Nurtured Heart Institute. Howard deduced that it was not attention that children were seeking, but rather relationship. And don't all children benefit from positive relationships? While Howard started NHA with behaviorally challenging children in mind, challenging in it as a synonym really to intense or high energy. Parents, teachers, and therapeutic professionals have found this approach to be effective with a variety of children. In group settings or as a parent with multiple children, using this approach with only one child and not the whole family, or as a teacher, not the whole class, can backfire as children might behaviorally flare up to gain the same enhanced relationship that this approach can offer. Many people treat intensity as the enemy. Through Nurtured Heart's approach, the lens of Nurtured Heart, we're asked to think of intensity more as a life force. Many influential individuals in the history of our world have shared this trait of vibrant intensity. So think about people like Simone Biles, Albert Einstein, Bill Gates. The Nurtured Heart approach is designed to show children who will grow up to be individuals like these successful individuals, that the greatness of who they really are, just as they are, harnessing that intense energy into positive outcomes. This approach is about changing the lens through which we see each other as human beings and how we see our children, focusing on affirming our children's greatest attributes and helping them to see and nurture them as well. I'm going to hand it off to John now.
Sounds good. Thanks, Pema. I'll introduce myself quickly too. My name is John Walton. Right now, I'm the 7th grade school counselor at Community Middle School. Before that, I was a high school counselor for about 17 years, and I have been a classroom teacher, and I've coached for that time too. So lots of different venues in which some of the parts of this technique can be applied. And it's cool to talk to you guys as parents today too, because we've talked mostly to educators, and I think this is a really great parenting tool. Okay, so I'll kind of get into piggybacking a little bit off what Pema talked about, and that is that the conventional discipline methods aren't always great fits for these students that Howard started with, these intense students. And sometimes we use intense to we have other adjectives that we use like troubled or discipline problems, things like that. And a lot of what Howard would say is the reason that students get these labels is because of the fact that the conventional methods that we're using, whether it be in our world in the classroom or in your world in your house, sometimes don't work for students that are labeled and intense in sort of this framework. And he says that things that sort of fall into this conventional way of doing things would be yelling and screaming, because a student who's intense is drawn to strong energy. And When they get strong energy, they tend to keep wanting more and more strong energy because it gives them the connection they're looking for. So things like power struggles, arguments, timeouts where there's not a defined amount of time or limits to it, things like that end up becoming not the best way to communicate and align our energy in terms of doing things all the way from discipline to getting them to buy into what we'd like them to buy into. And oftentimes it actually makes the situation worse because these students are trying to connect, but the only way, and in this case, children that you're working with. And what will happen is that they'll keep seeking out the connection, but they'll seek out the connection through that intense or negative energy as opposed to a more positive or neutral energy. And the next slide that we're going to go into is I'm going to talk about the idea of building inner wealth. And the nurtured heart approach goes off of the idea that all students have a portfolio of experiences, ways they see the world, feelings, thoughts. They have a created portfolio. And what happens for a lot of these students that Howard is defining as intense is that most of their portfolio is built up of either negative experiences or highly energized experiences, of which most of these experiences are not necessarily the type of energy that leads to productive outcomes in many situations. So what we're trying to do in this approach is we're going to work with them to not necessarily replace the portfolio they had before, because there are certain things that happened before that might have consequences that are still around, even as we're trying to realign them to better energy. But also there's things that can be learned and growth that can come from what we know about the old portfolio. But pretty much what we're trying to do is build a portfolio that's built more on energy that is positive, or I guess what we would call neutral. In other words, not highly energized in a negative way, but not necessarily over the top positive. And what we're trying to do is also acknowledge when students both make progress that we can see, but even make attempts um, towards progress in the right direction, which can be kind of counterintuitive because I think sometimes it's easy to think we either are successful or not successful at something we're doing, but this approach really puts a lot of strength into the idea of acknowledging actively and in the moment when students are making attempts to do what we would like them to do or things that we know are good for them. And I'm using kind of students and children here interchangeably because obviously as parents you interact with teachers in the classroom, and some of the same energy can be aligned or not aligned both in classrooms and in home settings, and can be successful in other approaches. So I look at it as really integrative across all forums. But at the end of the day, the building of the inner wealth is this idea of creating a new portfolio. On the next slide, what we're going to do is now we're going to kind of get into the nuts and bolts of the methodology. And there are three stands, like a stool, that Howard uses. There's absolutely no, absolutely yes, and absolutely clear. And Pema is going to be covering absolutely no and absolutely yes, which is kind of going to explain these energies and sort of how we avoid the negative energy, identify what it is, and then also talk about the positive energy and some reframing or connecting with that energy. And then the last part's going to be absolutely clear, which I'll cover, which is sort of how do we apply this in things like behavioral consequences or movement in the right direction with starts and stops along the way. And one of the things that comes up quite a bit, and Howard really likes stories and analogies, and I hope you do too, because I'm going to be using a lot of them today, especially my part about absolutely clear. But one of the stories he tells is about, he calls it Toys R Us analogy. And his idea is that we and our energy and our connection and relationships are really the most exciting toy that a child or a teen could have. And he sort of says that when you look at toys or even items that are popular, but not just, I would say, kids, I would say adults as well. A lot of these things are things that immediately grab our attention. They have a lot of, they bring excitement to us. They're things that make us want to stay engaged with them. They're interactive. They have a lot of things that draw you in and allow students to kind of match their energy and engagement with what the toy is providing them. And that's why things such as smartphones and devices and even like more complicated toys that have lights, and video games is another one that we'll talk about later. But these are things that really have a lot of engagement and also give a lot of feedback, and not necessarily negative feedback, a mix of feedback, but clear feedback to the children that we're working with. And so he says, really, at the end of the day, though, we are like a toy, and that we could also provide that feedback, that engagement, and that really positive energy that kids want to keep engaging with us and keep moving in the right direction on some of the things that we would want in order to continue to have the ability to engage with us. And so we really should begin to think about ourselves as the most exciting toy or an entertainment center with the greatest features, another way for him to put it. So he kind of says, when you're thinking about the energy you want to put into the world, think about it often as trying to create a version of yourself that would be sort of like a toy that a child would want to engage with. So if we move to my last slide, choosing more energy. And I'm not going to go too much in this because Pema's going to spend quite a bit of time getting to the nuts and bolts of this. But really what we're trying to do is we're trying to, in terms of the words we use, in terms of our framing of situations, and even our view of how we react to things not going perfectly the way we'd want, choosing words and choosing framing that allows us to kind of lean more into a positive, or, and I wouldn't even say it worse, or a more neutral energy to acknowledge um, good energy for positives and neutral energy to um, address things that we would want corrected, as opposed to a clear negative energy. And I don't want to step on Pema's toes right there, but that's a little bit of what the absolutely no and absolutely yes stands will be going into right now. So I'm going to turn it back over to her.
So I'm going to start off with stand one, which is absolutely no. I refuse to energize negativity. I do not reward negativity with my energy, connection, or relationship. So stand one really asks us to be reflective and intentional about where our energy is going. Behavioral changes in our children cannot begin until the child perceives that old pattern of response where connection and energy would go to those intense behaviors, um, until they see that negativity and that connection through the intense behavior is no longer available to them. So I have a video to share with you for us to kind of reflect on about this stand. But just a little caveat to that is we did a test run earlier, and unfortunately our sound is not working. So we're going to be flexible, and we're going to just imagine that we can hear the sound. But I think you'll get the message by just really paying attention to what's going on with this adorable child in the video. And then I'll ask you to kind of reflect on what you're noticing. What you can't hear is that the crying stops when the child doesn't see the adult recording. So maybe some of the things that you noticed were that the child was following the parent and throwing himself to the ground. And what you couldn't hear was that there was a lot of crying and wailing. You might have noticed the well-behaved dog following the parent around, and the parent ignoring the negative behavior, right? Like leaving the room, and then the child following again and throwing himself to the ground and crying. Maybe you were thinking to yourself that the parent was doing the absolute no, right? Refusing to give connection to and energize the negative behavior. But maybe you also might have noticed that there were some missed opportunities. Let me go to our next slide. Oops, there we go. So while stand one is about not giving energy to negativity, we don't simply want to ignore high energy or negative behaviors, as this can up the ante or invite escalation. Ignoring can actually teach kids to get better at getting worse. So the crying there was actually kind of getting a little louder. And it was, happening for a while there. When ignoring as the adult, we can sometimes miss out on the moments when the misbehavior is ceasing. As a kindergarten, I was a kindergarten classroom teacher. If a child was in the habit of having a tantrum when he or she didn't get a chance to play at a specific center during choice time, if you walked into my classroom, maybe you might have thought I was ignoring that child, but I was aware of what was going on. What I would do is I would often, affirm and name the positive behaviors going on around the child, to the other child. And I would also be paying attention to what that child was doing within the tantrum. And the moment that I saw the child make a move towards a positive behavior, whether it was a calming breath, or maybe he or she would move towards another center or take a break, right, and kind of take some soothing time, I would try to immediately affirm that choice and point out, oh, great, great choice. You were sad because you couldn't have that center time, but you chose to take a breath and think about what you could do next, right? So we don't want to just ignore as a passive experience. We don't want to just tune out. We want to refusing to energize is actually a very active experience. We want to hold on to our energy until the first opportunity to turn it back on for the child, such as when the baby stopped screaming in that video we watched. So we're not affirming that high energy crying, where we're staying neutral to it so that we can then be ready to affirm the positive behavior. So this is not always an easy thing for us as adults, right? To do so, we have to really develop our own social emotional skills as well. Really thinking about our own triggers, and developing our patience and coping skills during those high energy or intense moments to help us to refuse to energize that negativity, right? So which then leads us to stand two. Absolutely yes. So in absolutely yes, I relentlessly create and energize positivity and success. I energize and nurture firsthand experiences of success. So with stand two, I want to always be on the lookout for success and name those successes for my child or student. Now, the issue with catching a child doing good is that our ability to catch what is wrong is stronger, along with our language around that. So in this busy world, we as adults can get caught up in what needs to get done, right? We were just actually right before the webinar, the three of us were talking about all the things that we need to do, right? And how that can be stressful. And so we're rushing off to the next task or event. And if we have children in our lives, it can lead us to say things like, oh, why aren't you ready yet? Oh, you should have had your homework done by now, right? Or maybe if your child is making the right choice, or our students in our classrooms, you might not always acknowledge that, or you might just say a generic, oh, good job, right? When a child does something right. So what do we do about that? We need to use stronger, more specific positives. that navigate around defenses that give evidence of greatness. What does that mean? So our standards of what qualifies as good can sometimes be ambiguous. So instead of saying a generic good job, we need to build on our positive language and be really explicit. Howard draws a parallel to general praise as being junk food. It feels really good in the moment to say, you know, good job, excellent, amazing, but it has no nutritive power. It's empty communication. It's not really adding to our students' inner wealth or that portfolio that they're carrying around. So we really want to be thinking about how do we add to that portfolio, right? We want to make sure that positivity is being felt and digested, and that they're really understanding how we see them and what makes us see them like that. So for stand 2, we want to give children authentic recognition that includes clear evidence of success and is connected and real. We're not just trying to make the child feel good, we're trying to build their understanding of their inner wealth and help them curate that portfolio of all the positive characteristics that they hold, right? And we're giving them evidence of that. So one tool that can be helpful is this list of emotionally nutritious words that Howard has shared. It's that we can use, where instead of doing that generic good job when a child does something positive, we can affirm the specific characteristics that completing those tasks might say about them. Like getting your homework done before dinner shows me how responsible you've become, right? So we're naming the concrete action that the child is doing and then linking it to a positive characteristic. So these are words that are positive traits or examples of greatness that our children might carry with them, right? So you might say something like, getting dressed and ready for your day without me reminding you shows me how self-directed and ready for your day you are, right? And so now your child is adding that compliment, that really concrete compliment that shows who they are, into their inner portfolio and carrying that with them into their day, into their classroom, and thinking to themselves, oh, I'm self-directed. I know how to do what I need to do to be successful at home and then at school as well, right? So we can build our children's inner portfolio of how they view themselves in a positive way with the type of language that we as the adults are using to curate their understanding of who they are and how we perceive them. So we have to really be having that kind of positive dialogue with them throughout the day. So as I said before, our sound does not work. So I'm going to play this video, which shows what stand 2 can look like in a classroom. It is closed captioned. And for anyone who's just listening as they drive or anything like that, I will read the closed captioning for you. What would you like to use, Marlette? Well, a cat. A cat, the teacher says. Someone in tribe 2. What would you like to use, Brianna? A dog. A dog? Boys and girls, you worked so well together right there. Thank you for not fighting or feuding over what you were going to choose in that group. And tribe 4, what would you like to choose? Angela? Angela says a frog. A frog. Boys and girls, put your eyes on me before we do our vote. Let me just take a moment right here to say, during that process, no one fussed, no one was fighting, no one was saying, pick me, I want my answers. You could have been fussing and feuding and yelling about what you wanted, but you were respectful to each of your classmates in your tribe. You know what that shows? Discipline. It shows discipline, exactly, Brianna. Thank you, Haley. And it shows teamwork. It shows you are disciplined first graders and you have teamwork. Kiss your brains for that. Hold on while I just, okay, there we go. So what did you see in that video? And what did you hear from me? Sorry, that went pretty fast. I tried my best. So think about what you saw there and what you read or listened to as I was trying to be the sound. The teacher was naming the concrete things that were happening in the classroom and what type of positive characteristics those Behaviors Illustrated, those concrete behaviors illustrated. And she was using something called proactive recognition, talking about what could have gone wrong but didn't. So there are four different types of recognitions that Howard teaches about, which if you join us for the 3-hour PD in the future, you'll learn a little bit more about. So I want you to think about this classroom example and then think about home with your child, right? I want you to reflect on a day in your life with your child or children and what little successes happen throughout your day together that you can energize by naming them and connecting them to some of these emotionally nutritious words that I'm sharing on the screen right now. How can you build your child's inner wealth? What are the little things he or she is doing that show you that your child is appreciative or intuitive, loving, kind-hearted, respectful, thankful, right? And let's kind of make a plan for ourselves that we are going to name those things for our child or children and help them to add that to their portfolio. So we have to build the foundation first. Remember that we must build the foundation with stand 1, refusing to give energy to negativity in order for stand 2, energizing positivity, to have its intended impact. We have to create time in that is rich and established, or time outs, which John will talk about a little bit more, cannot have the intended impact. Then limit setting can be effective, which brings us to John and stand 3.
Perfect. Well, and now we have a framework for where stand 3 is going, the absolutely clear. And stand 3 is usually the one where even people who've bought in, including us educators, they say, all of this sounds great and I'd like to do this and I'm going to work towards this. But what about those situations where we have to address behavior or put it into practice? Is this stuff really going to work? And one of the first things I think that we should talk about is the idea of creating the environment and ourselves moving in the right direction is the first step towards this process working. So at the beginning, always trying to use emotionally nutritious words, always being able to frame in that absolutely yes or absolutely no language is going to be difficult. And it certainly is not something that you need to be perfect at the beginning. Much like what we want the kids to do moving in the right direction, what we're trying to do is set a framework over time where this becomes the norm of what kids are hearing a little bit. So I want to start by saying that it's not going to like immediately come easy to you, and it's not going to be something that the first time a kid hears it, they're going to always completely comply or go along with it. But over time, it is pretty amazing how the framework that you set becomes the environment that you're going to be delivering these consequences out in. And if we go to the next slide, there's two sort of core tenets to this, and I'm going to use an example that kind of shows how we know kids do respond to this. And that one is that with these students that are intense, what we have to understand is that while we're taking them out of time with us, which we've defined as something that we want kids to understand is their best time, that relationship, that connection with positive energy, that idea of being in the game with us, so to speak, and connecting. If we take students out of that type of energy and that type of environment, often what ends up happening is the energy is inconsistent. And so the kids read it as negativity or they try to do things that get your attention, whether it be good, bad, or indifferent is kind of what they're going for. And then it becomes that cycle of kids continuing to do provocative things or know how to push your buttons, as you'll hear sometimes. We give that energy to negativity with screaming or taking away things. And while these things can work in terms of immediate consequences, I think Howard asked you to say, in the long term, if these things keep coming back, this consequence we're giving, is it really about changing the behavior or is it more about making us feel good? And kind of looking at it and saying, are we getting what we want, and are we just giving energy to negativity all the time? So that is a framework one in terms of what we want to think about when we're delivering consequences. Doesn't mean that there won't be consequences, because there have to be, but it sort of means how can we continue to give those consequences or use techniques that sort of go more into a brief period out of connecting with you, and then a path back to connecting with you or an experience, whether it be in your house, in the classroom, on a sports team, that they have shown that they want to do. And the idea is that students will work towards that if we create that enriching environment. And if we go to the next one, the second idea of why these timeouts, whether they be putting someone in a timeout away from action, like you would do with a younger child, right? Like, I'm going to put you here for 15 minutes. Sort of the shorter period of time, Howard would say is better, but taking away things and taking away our time from them is going to be another way to think about timeouts in this framework. And a big thing of what this approach says is that when we haven't set up that sort of way of communicating that accentuates moves in the right direction, or positive energy, acknowledging what a child did, that was either in the right direction or all the way what we would want them to do, reinforcing that that's sort of the behavior that we want, and then framing it in the larger context of that we see that and we acknowledge that, because that gives them a piece of that relationship. And sort of when we go off of the idea that we are taking away the relationship, really being aware that when we do that, and we do that consistently or over time, we do not have that energy that ultimately is going to spur change, or create an environment where students are feeling that they're connecting with us in a healthy way. And then if you extend it all the way to the beginning with the portfolio, what that would mean is that it continues to be those negative interactions, non-engagement in the portfolio that builds up over time. So those are two reasons why it doesn't fail. So how do we do this? And one of the things that when we present this to educators that we work with, that really connects with them, is this idea that we see examples, even with our most intense kids, of being able to engage with video games and there's a sports analogy with this too that is going to be talked about a little bit later, because that's another area where students can spend lots of time engaged and not unengaged, while also having clear rules and consequences. And Howard says that one of the reasons that a student may struggle in a classroom setting or at home, even for like after 5 or 10 minutes, but can play a video game for 4 hours, is because they have an understanding of the system, they have an understanding of consequences, and they have a relationship with the game that gives them that positive, energetic connection. And even the negative interaction that they're getting is clear. They understand why those consequences are happening, and they're able to get back in the game as quickly as possible. So some of the ideas in a list that was shared with us in terms of the understanding of video games and why that environment is one that so many of our students connect with, is the incentives in video games are very clear. You're getting points, you're getting coins, you're getting tokens, you're on boards. Kids know what it looks like to succeed in that area, and the game constantly reinforces it. And over time, you can build up to greater and greater rewards as the game goes on, as you get more and more connected with the game. So you're building that connection with the game, and you are seeing positive encouragement from that and rewards from that, especially when you're doing what the game wants you to do, to both stay connected and advance through the game. There's also it's a rich environment for success. You can take chances in that environment, and even if it doesn't go the way you want, you can still get reframed in the fact that even if you were to die in a video game, in a game that has lives, for example, what happens is it doesn't allow you, it's not like you can't play the game again. You get restarted, there's a consequence. You were not able to be successful. You saw hopefully why you weren't successful, or if you kept doing that one thing, you would continue to be unsuccessful. And the game restarts, and our kids are able to stay with that because they're invested in the game and they're invested in the environment that they're in. The punishments are not personal. So it's not like the video game's having a bad day with you or they think that the video game doesn't like them. They understand what the consequences are, and when the consequences are doled out, they're doled out to everyone in exactly the same way. So it's not necessarily personal. It's sort of that neutral energy in terms of identifying a negative consequence or a negative decision along the way. It doesn't mean there's not a consequence. You have to start over or you lose a video game life, for example, but you get to go right back in the game very quickly. Um, the energy is also there's bells, there's whistles, there's music, there's energy. Kids are getting in positive stimuli along the way to really reinforce, just like our tone and our posture and our praise, right? Being delivered with that positive energy. The video game does that through all of those features like music, whistles, and bells. And the rules are clear, predictable, and easy to learn. Kids can pretty much jump into a video game. Adults, maybe not so much. We've seen that, but kids, they are bought into the video game environment. They can quickly understand the rules, or someone can explain it to them quickly. They're clear, they're predictable, they know what goes on. Yes, maybe over time, certain mistakes they make in a game might have a bigger consequence, but they always have the chance to start over again. And this is why, in Howard's approach, and I would say what I see too, explains why someone who is sort of getting messaged in a home or a school environment as not being able to stay engaged can stay engaged for hours and hours and days and weeks on end in a video game environment. So as we move to the next slide, um, the sort of the idea with that is that, as I said before, players and officials know the rules and they're not negotiable. Here's where he talks about basketball. And basketball is another example, and sports is another area where we see students who may not be successful in certain areas connect. And I'm going to use basketball, but it could just as much apply to baseball or hockey or individual sports like tennis and golf. All of these sports have sort of rule structures that operate the same way. When you think about basketball, right, when you do something that is not allowed, you get a foul. Now, you can foul out of a game if you keep making the same mistake over and over again. It doesn't mean you can't play the next game, but what it means is when you make too many mistakes in one game, it removes you from that game. But individual fouls don't foul you out. Maybe it leads to a free throw, maybe the ball gets taken out of bounds, but a, basically a player can immediately re-engage with the game, and it's not an end of it. But it wasn't that the behavior wasn't acknowledged, it was that the behavior was acknowledged clearly, quickly, and in a way that the person playing could understand. Another example he uses, and it's going to be in another slide, but I'll say it here, is the idea that even a toenail over the line, right there, a toe or a toenail over the line is a toe over the line. And the idea behind that is you're not negotiating the rules that you've set out. It doesn't mean that you're enforcing them, but he would say engaging with negative energy would be arguing about the rules or the semantics or getting drawn into a long drawn out back and forth. And once we've created that positive energy and that relationship connection with you that a child wants to have, it's going to be quicker to move to this where you enforce what the rule is, you acknowledge what rule was not addressed, and then you quickly allow an opportunity for the child to come back into the environment when they have sort of been given the consequence. And then afterwards, when they start to make progress or do not break that rule again, we're using those active recognitions that Pema talked about in terms of showing that we also understand when there's movement in the right direction, as opposed to just engaging solely with the negative. And that, as I said before, perfection's not required. It's going to take a while for all of us. It's going to take a while for them to understand our expectations and to frame the environment we're working in. It's going to take a while for you, just like it does for us, to be able to try to be consistent in terms of using those emotionally nutritious words or not going into that negative energy when there is sort of a rule that's being broken. And it's going to take a while for it all to come together where it's like, wow, I get rewarded from and gain energy and feel really good about this way of engaging with my parents, my coach, my teachers, my friends. And you don't have to be perfect at the beginning. It's really about these baby steps towards creating the framework that over time leads to that true change, that transformation. And then the next slide, if we go to that, and I think this is my last one before I turn it back over to Pema, is that children do not awaken by the fear of punishment. They awaken to their greatness. And one of the things that in my job as a counselor, I often say is that we want students to understand rules. We have norms, we have mores that we work off of. But just the idea of punishments and people following it just because is a relative concept. And pretty much all behavior to some degree is a choice. And what we are trying to do is use this approach to incentivize the choice that children make in terms of their behavior and their engagement with us with energy into a relationship and an environment where they see that the choice that is the one they connect with best is the one that awakens their greatness, but also is one that doesn't engage that negative energy.
Set of strategies for helping children and us as adults to use their intensity in successful ways and awaken to their greatness. So this approach can be used in the school system as well as at home. And I think, I've said many times to our students and staff that we're stronger together. And if we are using this approach both at home and at school, I think we can see our children really seeing their own greatness and adding to their inner portfolio, right? Creating these positive relationships by choosing not to energize the negativity and really show children how their positive behaviors illustrate the amazing characteristics that they carry within themselves and out into the world as they grow and become citizens out there. So we hope that this presentation was helpful to you. It was really just a little dose of the nurtured heart approach. And there is a longer 3-hour workshop, which we're hoping to be able to share in the summertime. So if you're interested in that, we invite you to scan this QR code and submit your interest and preferences for timing, and if there's a need for childcare, and if you have other questions or just kind of a focus that you'd like for that workshop to take, for you to share that information with us through this survey. So we thank you so much for spending this time tonight with us and for being a great audience. And we apologize for some of the technical difficulties that occurred with the sound. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody. And we always just want to, as in closing, just want to remind everyone, in case you weren't here at the beginning, we are recording tonight's presentation. So we will have that posted on the district's YouTube channel by the beginning of next week. We did have a request in the Q&A for some of the sort of handouts or specifically the emotionally nutritious words. And we do have we can share that. So you can reach out to any one of the three of us individually via email for that. And if I can figure it out, we can also try to post those along with the video. I'm just not exactly sure how to do that, but I'm going to rely on our communications team and our tech team to help me with that. So look for that. And we look forward to seeing you again at another parent university and hearing your feedback about the nurtured heart approach and our presentation here tonight. So thanks again. I'll give you one more minute there to scan the QR code, and we look forward to seeing you again and hearing from you again about how we can help support the whole child across all of the spectrums of our district. So thanks, everybody. Have a great night.